My name is Dawn Abear, and I'm with Voters East of the Industrial Canal, and I want to thank you all for participating in our forum. So we got to get started. I'd like you to give your full name, your position, how long you've been in that position, and what seat you are seeking. We'll start with Mr. John.
Hey, yes, I'm Van John, and I'm seeking the candidate seat. I'm so sorry, I'm seeking the Senate seat against the incumbent Bill Cassidy here November 3rd.
Okay, and what position are you presently in?
Just a politician that started this year.
As a politician. Okay, all right.
Yes.
And we'll go to Mr. Wenstrup.
Sure. My name is Peter Wenstrup. I am a New Orleans public school teacher. I've been a school teacher for 12 years, most recently up until this May at Livingston Collegiate Academy on Dwyer Road.
Oh, okay.
I'm seeking the office of United States Senate, currently occupied by Bill Cassidy, and poorly occupied.
Hey, Mr. Aaron, hi. We can't hear you. You're on mute.
It doesn't appear that he's on mute, but we still can't.
It's not? Okay. We'll go with Mr. Bowie. Yes. Hello. In the middle. Can you hear me?
Yeah, John Bourgeois?
Bourgeois, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Hi, I'm John Paul Bourgeois, and I'm running for U.S. Senate as a no party affiliate. And sorry if I'm a little distracted. I have my 4-month-old with me right now.
No problem.
Okay.
Okay, and you're running for?
U.S. Senate against Bill Cassidy.
Okay, all right. Mr. Aaron, can you hear us now? You can?
Yes.
Okay.
He can hear us, but we can't hear you, Mr. Aaron.
Yeah.
I see.
I think we
Say
can.
almost heard you. Say something.
Say something else?
Did that help?
Yes.
That helps.
Yes.
Okay, there
Yes.
we go. All right.
Okay. I know technical difficulties.
Right. I'm Dr. Sigler. I'm a neurosurgeon. I am a libertarian, and I am running against Bill Cassidy for his seat.
Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce you to the our two people that are going to help with the questions. We have Donna Glapion and we have Brandon Gilmore. And let's get started. Okay, good luck. Brandon,
It's
unmute.
It's
Brandon.
muted.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Good evening, gentlemen. We have a few questions. We're going to start in the order with Mr. John first and then proceed that way.
Thank you.
The first question is, at what point did you decide to seek the U.S. House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate seat, and what skills do you possess that qualifies you to preside over this decision?
So I started the second they brought out this whole COVID hoax, this whole just very elaborate scheme to angle us, this civilization for collapse. I'm running prematurely. I do not have the funds and I'm not at the age that I wanted to initially run for United States Senate. But because of this ambush on an election year from the radical left, they have to be stopped. And this whole infrastructure, the social distancing masks, all this junk has to be stopped in its infancy because our very freedom is at stake. And we have to stop and think about what we're giving up for what we're getting. And the second part of your question was what, sir?
Qualifications.
My
sorry.
qualifications? Yes, okay, I can talk about several. One, I ran one of the largest oil and gas companies here that occupied in the state of Louisiana, Texas Petroleum Investment Company, for years as a corporate fiduciary. So I'm used to managing people, and I am very good at handling business. I'm very assertive. I do not procrastinate. Very, very punctual and to the T, attention to detail. I appreciate you asking, unless you have anything more specific.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Bourgeois?
So I decided to run. I've been pondering this for a while, but I decided to run after we hit over 100,000 deaths. And as an epidemiologist and as a librarian, the kind of disinformation and lack of awareness of the situation, and on this milestone, as we hit 200 deaths today, I feel that it's important to have someone who is independent, not affiliated with any party whatsoever, but does have a background in public health to directly address this. I've been active in civic associations. So as soon as COVID broke out, my church began handing out food baskets to the neediest in our community. And despite handing out hundreds of food baskets every Saturday, it was never enough. And I'm seeing that there is this consistent need, and it actually goes much deeper and needs to be addressed. So that's why I'm running.
Thank you. Mr. Aaron?
Yes, so I've been active in politics or following politics for a very long time. I've been following as a libertarian for a long time. I'm a second generation libertarian. And basically, I've just watched our country and our freedoms erode considerably and become quite polarized by the two parties that are basically controlling the entire scene. And I felt it was time for some new blood and some better ideas and a better way of doing things to bring us back from what I think is the brink here.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron. Mr. Wenstrup?
I decided to run for the United States Senate this spring. I am incredibly concerned about, as these gentlemen mentioned, the chaos in Washington, the corruption based on career politicians who are more concerned with their reelection and their and their ability to further their own careers and their bank accounts rather than serving folks like the kids at my school and in my community. And so I agree that we need a degree of independence and we need people who will stand up and fight for our community. And then my qualifications are that I have stood up for my community, I've stood up for young people in this New Orleans community and this Louisiana community for, as I mentioned, over a decade.
Thank you, Mr. Wenstrup. And I see we have a Mr. Bonner.
Yes, Trepania Bonner, Crescent City Media Group.
Mr. Bonner, could you, could you give us your full name, your position, and how long you've been in that position, and what position you are vying for?
Actually, I'm not a part of the election. I'm one person that may be asking a question tonight.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. All right.
Fortuitous.
Okay, you're a little early.
Shadowing, maybe.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry about that, gentlemen. And my second question, we're going to start with Mr. John.
Thank you.
Healthcare is a major concern, especially the high cost of healthcare. What is your plan in addressing this problem? For instance, protecting the Affordable Health Care Act and high drug costs.
The Affordable Health Care Act, that's that Obama deal?
Yes, sir.
Pay for more and get less. I will advocate to repeal that. I do know that healthcare costs have skyrocketed and they continue to. And there is a wrongful incentivization going on with this whole COVID deal. And if you want to go to the hospital or any emergency room, seek any sort of medical help, they're going to zap that forehead. They're going to, send off all your DNA to some database. It's a crying shame. So that needs to be put an end to immediately. We actually need a damn overhaul on the whole medical system going on. They are gorging on this whole pandemic deal. Big tech and big medicine. It's a dream scenario for big pharma and big medicine. So I advocate for a complete overhaul of it, especially the price of prescriptions, which I think Trump was trying to lessen in recent days. So that's my stance on that.
Thank you, Mr. John.
Yes, sir.
So I think that there are certain parts of the Obamacare plan that need to be protected. For example, protections for pre-existing conditions. The incumbent has consistently voted against pre-existing condition protections despite having served the neediest in this state for over a decade. And he is running as a doctor, and yet he is consistently against pre-existing condition protections. So there are certain parts that are not worth it. The inconsistency, the unreliability of the market, that needs to be addressed. However, throwing out the pre-existing conditions protections is a mistake. Also, the Medicare expansion has covered over 500,000 people in this state alone that otherwise would not be covered. Those are the neediest in this state that are getting protection and getting medical services that they would not otherwise have. And by giving them those services at an earlier point, we prevent more severe health outcomes in the future, such as uncontrolled diabetes, chronic heart failure, things like this. So I am in favor of actually making, hey, Leela, I'm in favor of making wellness visits and wellness care affordable for everybody. And I think that if we can implement systems that make it easier to address underlying health issues earlier, then we prevent more expensive issues down the line. So that would be one main point that I would advocate for.
Mr. Aaron, would you mind if I went first? I apologize. I have a 7:15. I just wanted, I appreciate that. I just want to directly address issues facing voters east of the Industrial Canal. We just got a hospital a few years ago that provided access to folks mainly in New Orleans East to medical care that's easy to access. But that's just a start. We still have plenty of folks in our community who do not have ready access to healthcare. And part of that is that Medicaid reimbursement rates are too low. So we need to increase those even by $10 so that doctors will accept more Medicaid students. We also need more school-based clinics so that young people don't have to miss half a day of school or a day of school to get routine medical treatment. And those are going to be priorities for me and for the people in New Orleans East. So again, I'm very sorry. I will rejoin as soon as I can, but I did have a previously scheduled event. So thank you very much.
And Mr. Aaron?
Thank you. So obviously, being a neurosurgeon, I've gotten to see a lot of changes, particularly over the last 10 or 12 years or so of my direct involvement with medical care, and observing how it's changed since the ACA or Obamacare has been enacted has been very interesting. What you've observed happen is that while Medicaid has been expanded, doctors that accept it have actually gone down, mainly because it really doesn't reimburse appropriately. I don't think that that's actually done anything that it was intended to do. And still, it's creating basically a two-tiered system, which is what happens when you have socialized healthcare in any other country, where those who have money to pay for it pay for private care, and those that don't end up in the system. I think that I would prefer to do away with any sort of a socialized healthcare, but also make prices more apparent, because right now there is a hidden price scheme of which, as a doctor, I'm not even aware, that is decided by insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid, and hospital administrators. And if those prices became fixed and obvious and people were aware of what those were, as well as what actual quality metrics look like for physicians and hospitals, I think that would do a lot more for people to be able to choose the best place for their care and to understand where they can get an affordable healthcare option.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron. Okay, he's done. So my next question it's a yes or no question. Do you feel a Supreme Court justice should be replaced by January 1st, 2021? And we start with Mr. John.
Hey, yes, Trump definitely needs to put in one of his nominees, for sure. They tried to hold on. Oh, this is yes or no? Yes. I'm so sorry. Yes. Sorry.
Thank you. That's all right. And Mr. Bourgeois?
No.
No, thank you. And Mr. Aaron?
I don't know that it's necessarily a yes or no. I would say no, but if it happens, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it.
Thank you
I
for
don't
that.
think I don't think it must happen. How about that?
Gotcha. We appreciate that. Okay. My next question, and we're going to start with Mr. John again. A high number of employed workers are working in a variety of minimum wage jobs. Would you be inclined to pass legislation to raise the minimum wage to a living wage?
I'm not really, cost of living raises maybe, but it depends how much you're talking, because that has a huge ripple effect. You raise minimum wage, you bump that up, every employer is going to want to deal with that. You know, they're going to pad their prices on everything. You know, if you raise minimum wage, all the McDonald's franchise owners, all the just everywhere, they're going to start, you know, tacking on higher prices of everything else. So it's going to make our dollar go less far, I feel.
Thank you. Mr. Bourgeois?
No, I do not. And I think that if you raise the minimum wage, then the market will adjust accordingly. And so those lower level jobs that pay less, the market will adjust so that the dollar will go less far, and you'll have rapid inflation. But what we do need to do is make it possible for people to be socially mobile. I mean, we have the lowest social mobility right now since the Middle Ages, and I think that needs to be addressed, because addressing the minimum wage will not solve the issue, but addressing social mobility will address the underlying cause.
Thank you. Mr. Aaron?
So, as a libertarian, I'm generally not in favor of any sort of a minimum wage, basically because I think that it locks us into an ideal, and I would prefer people to be able to negotiate between them and their employer what their wage actually is based on skills, experience, etc., so that you can get more of a stratified, more appropriate wage for each person. We've also observed that when you raise, like in Seattle, the minimum wage up to $15, the effect that ends up happening is the opposite of what you want, because you have to really make a decision on what jobs you really need as an employer to actually move your business forward, which unfortunately eliminates a lot of jobs rather than, so a few people end up benefiting from the $15, and the people that otherwise would have benefited from a stratified or even keeping the minimum wage the same don't have a job anymore, and there aren't other jobs available. So generally, no, I would not support that. I think that we should be able to allow to allow employers and employees to negotiate their wages appropriately.
Thank you for that, Mr. Aaron. And my last question before I turn it over to Ms. Glapion. Have either one of you been involved in any actions for minority communities that have been negatively affected by the large industrial companies generating toxic chemicals? And we'll start with Mr. John.
The answer is no. Unfortunately, I have not.
Thank you for that.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Bourgeois?
Yes, I have been. So in my work as an epidemiologist, I worked with the communities all throughout the river parishes, taking samples of toxins in the soil, in the air, in the water, and have reported those results to communities. And in my work as a librarian, I am part of the state's environmental health monitoring system in order to disseminate environmental monitoring specs to the affected communities and making people aware of those data points.
Thank you. And Mr. Aaron?
So my honest answer to that is I'm not entirely sure, because as a neurosurgeon, it's hard to say how many tumors I run across may have been as a result of toxic exposure. So maybe it's hard for me to know precisely.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time to ask these questions. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Glapion. She has a few questions.
Thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. If you would answer the questions in the same order that you have previously. My first question for Mr. John is, Louisiana's wetlands are of great concern to residents living in those areas and the state as a whole. Can voters be assured that you will continue funding projects that protect our wetlands?
Yes, ma'am. We own property on the Gulf Coast here in Vermilion. Also produced oil for over a decade in the wetlands, and I understand how vital they are. So yes, very passionate about that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bourgeois.
So having grown up in Cameron Parish, we are one of the areas most affected by climate change. And having worked in Thibodaux and Lafourche Parish, it's even the same issue down there. And my wife works in Plaquemines Parish, so they are repeatedly hit by these storms and losing more and more land. So this is an urgent issue. We are some of the newest land in the world, and we're losing it the most rapidly. So this needs to be addressed, yes.
Thank you. Doc, did you say your last name was Ziegler?
Sigler, Sigler.
Dr. Sigler.
Yes. So I support preserving the wetlands. I'm actually not originally from Louisiana. I'm from Delaware in the mid-Atlantic, so coastal state that is rapidly losing its coast due to erosion. So I understand it, and I would like to see it preserved. I think that we need to take a hard look at how we do that and how we fund that, and then might be able to find some public-private partnerships that would be better suited to the task, in my opinion.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. John.
Yes.
In your opinion, how important are climate action initiatives in the protection of our environment?
What do you mean by that? Are you talking about this whole global warming deal?
Whatever you perceive to be protection of our climate and environment.
Okay. I believe this whole climate change it's another hoax. We are carbon-based beings, and it's an attack on carbon. And we're carbon-based life forms. So that whole thing is another hoax that I will blow wide open and call out all the people trying to orchestrate that. It was invented, just like COVID-19.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Bourgeois?
So having seen the effects of climate change, we do need to take steps to mitigate it. As a practicing Catholic, Pope Francis called to divest from investments in fossil fuels. I don't think it needs to go that far, but I do think that there does need to be more of a transition to renewable energy sources, considering that fossil fuel emissions are one of the leading causes of climate change, of man-made climate change. So I support any initiatives. However, our energy sector does need to be protected, and it is a vital part of our economy. So there can be a hybrid approach. It doesn't need to be all or nothing, but it is real and it's happening, and we're seeing the effects immediately.
Thank you. Dr. Ziegler?
So I, as a neurosurgeon and as a physician in general, want to be able to use every single tool that's available to me. Presently, I think that one of our zero emission tools has been completely boxed out of this discussion in the form of nuclear energy. I say zero emission because it only emits water vapor. It is neutral. There is some, of course, uranium waste that comes from that actually can be dealt with in a very responsible manner. There has not been a new nuclear reactor built in this country in over 40 years, 50 years. Europe and Asia rely almost exclusively on nuclear power and supplementation of coal and other fossil fuels. I think that we should remove the restrictions and do safe, clean nuclear energy in association with every other possible form of energy so that we can get a modern approach to energy in this country rather than being stuck in the last 100 years or so.
Thank you. Next question. Mr. John, what is your opinion regarding the Black Lives Matter movement?
It is funded by George Soros. What's funny about that is Newt Gingrich was on Fox News the other day, and he said, George Soros funds this, and they cut the interview. You cannot call out the people funding this and loading the cards of these. This is an unorganic movement. It's funded, and there's two Marxist women that run it. That's completely concerning, and it does nothing for Black lives. It's that and Antifa are to disrupt and cause havoc before the election, and they need to be gotten rid of. They do not help Black lives. If anything, they stir up everything.
Mr. Bourgeois?
I feel that any movement that draws attention to the inequalities inherent in our systemic racism and the systemic racism built into our system that was founded upon slavery should be encouraged, and those voices deserve a place at the table. We have seen the historic racisms through redlining, through access to home loans. Despite Black veterans serving this country in World War II, they were denied access to the same rights and privileges as white veterans. And so we are seeing this suppression boiling up now 80 years later, or over 150 years later after the end of slavery. So it is important, and it needs to be addressed and listened to, because there are systemic issues in this country.
Thank you, Dr. Siegler.
I would like to point out that I think that there's a difference between the Black Lives Matter organization and the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that the movement is pretty much anybody who gets out there and is trying to draw attention to the fact that we still have the vestiges of clear abuse of political power that has basically led to a systemic racism. I'm in support of highlighting and actually doing something real to change all of that. I think that much of what we've observed from our leaders in Washington, so-called leaders in Washington, has been nothing but placation and empty promises and discussions. I think that we have I have basically a four-pronged approach that I would recommend. One, we need to end the drug war that basically has caused an over-militarization of our police and unfairly or disproportionately affects people of color. And I think that we need to end gun control, which takes away people's ability to defend themselves in marginalized communities. And we need to demilitarize the police and no-knock raids. Those would be real steps to moving us away from systemic racism and the problems that Black Lives Matter highlights.
Thank you, sir. That's all I have. I'm going to give the floor to you, Mr. Bonner.
Thanks. I have two quick questions for you guys. One about federal legislation. Another concerning the new laws and standards around our current elections, our elections that are going to happen in November. As many of you know, this is the first census and redistricting process without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. Do you guys support restoring the Voting Rights Act if you were elected to the Senate?
I'd have to look into that. I don't know. So defer to someone else.
I fully support it. Since the repeal of key provisions of the Voting Rights Act, we have seen voter purges, and that has led to massive disenfranchisement. I mean, during the 2016 election, there were over 250,000 people removed from their rolls in New York City alone during the primaries. So that highlights a significant issue, and that kind of disenfranchisement minimizes confidence in our democracy and therefore minimizes and weakens our democracy itself.
I'm actually not fully familiar with what's occurred with the Voting Rights Act, but I do absolutely support everybody having the opportunity to exercise their constitutional right to vote and participate in the system. So generally speaking, I'd like to see that happen. If the Voting Rights Act would do that, I would support that.
Yes, just to share with you all, in 2013, there was a decision by the Supreme Court. The case was called the Shelby versus Holder case, came out of Alabama, and key provisions to the Voting Rights Act were annulled. More importantly, the provision that would allow pre-clearance for former Confederate states and other territories to have their redistricting maps pre-cleared before they were instituted on the local levels. My next question has to do with our current emergency elections policy. Many of you may not know that, well, there was recently a victory. Originally the hearing stated that we'd have less early voting days for fall elections, even though we had additional days from 7 to 13 over the summer. That was reduced from 13 to 6, and the law states we have to have 7. And so I know a recent case was filed, and the hearing was held, and the case was won, and early voting has been extended. But one thing that's concerning to us is that Our most vulnerable population, meaning our seniors, have to have an excuse to vote absentee and a witness to sign their voter form. Do you guys support this, or do you support a blanket approach to allow absentee voting for all of our vulnerable residents in Louisiana?
I'd have to look more into this. Again, I didn't have time to prepare for these questions. So just, again, defer to someone else.
So, as an election commissioner and an election commissioner in charge in my precinct, I have followed these results closely. And so I would, I fully support it. I wrote a letter to the editor, to the advocate, and have attacked the Secretary of State on Twitter over this. And I think that in addition to expanding the number of early voting days, they did expand the number of ailments that you could have. For example, I thought if you had a pre-existing condition, the federal judge said that we had to revert back to the provisions that were in the July-August COVID plan. Which makes absolute sense. The only reason we didn't do that is because Secretary Ardwan didn't think he could get it through the legislature. So it went to the courts, and the courts rightly ruled that we needed the expanded protections that we had previously had. This is not anything new. And so as a public health official, as a librarian, and as an election commissioner, this makes absolute sense, and we should have these expanded roles.
So I actually, coming from my home state of Delaware, I have previously in my education life, which took me around the country, voted absentee, and I needed no excuse. It's actually disturbing to me that you need an excuse. As a citizen, you should have the right to make your vote however you see fit. I think that having more early votes, making it easy to vote absentee should you choose to do so, being able to go in person if you choose to do so, and perhaps developing a secure online system and utilizing the 21st century technology we all have. And it has to be possible that we do online banking that's secure. I think we can do online voting too. Make it as easy as possible and secure as possible for somebody to cast their vote and exercise their rights.
Thank you, guys. That's all the questions I have for you.
Mr. Bonner, thank you so much. So I really want to thank you all for participating. I know this is, really strange times running for office right now. So thank you so much and good luck.